In Tremendous Trifles, G.K. Chesterton says, "Can you not see," I said, "that fairy tales in their essence are quite solid and straightforward, but this everlasting fiction about modern life is in its nature essentially incredible? Folklore means that the soul is sane, but that the universe is wild and full of marvels. Realism means that the world is dull and full of routine, but that the soul is sick and screaming. The problem of the fairy tale is, what will a healthy man do with a fantastic world? The problem of the modern novel is, what will a madman do with a dull world?"
Okay.
Welcome to the new Mason Jar. Today, we could not be more delighted to have our good friend Vigen Guroian with us today. Just to give you a little background, if you don't know who Vigen is, he was on the Literary Life podcast talking to Angelina and I about fairy tales, but today he's going to talk to us here about fairy tales. He has a BA from the University of Virginia and a PhD in theology from Drew University. He retired from his position as professor of religious studies and Orthodox Christianity at the University of Virginia in 2015. He was the recipient of the University of Virginia Student Council Distinguished Teacher Award. Dr. Guroian lives in Culpeper, Virginia, on 5 acres of rolling countryside where he tends his perennial beds and vegetable gardens and enjoys strolling down the wooded Wordsworthian walk to Hungry Run. Wow, that sounds lovely. He has written 10 books, and many of you probably know his Tending the Heart of Virtue, which has been translated into many languages. It's just a superb book which has been recently republished. I hope everyone here has gotten it. But now, since he's retired, he's given over himself to speaking and doing workshops with homeschooling parents and teachers of classical schools throughout the country. So welcome to the new Mason Jar, Dr. Guroian.
Good to be here. Can I add just a bit here?
Oh, please do.
Sell my own writing. Yeah, Tending the Heart. We issued a second edition a couple of years ago, and I expanded it by about 100 pages, three new chapters. So it's in some ways in some ways a new book, and I had the opportunity to introduce these new stories into it. I wrestled with whether I would write a second book, and I decided not to because the theme within Tending the Heart of Virtue is something that I thought was important for new generations. That book was first published 25 years ago.
Mm.
So, yes, look at the second edition, if you will, all of you out there.
Yes, please
Well,
do, and you will not be disappointed. It is a very important book to read, even probably more important now than it was 25 years ago. So,
amen.
yeah.
Yes, I didn't know what my audience would be when I first wrote the book. I had to guess because, there were homeschoolers, but classical schooling was just getting its footing a quarter century ago. Yeah.
That's true. And now fairy tales are making a comeback, probably because of you, partially. And Angelina Stanford is very, very prominent in that field also. So, and I'm just someone here I'm just the mom saying, please read fairy tales to your children. Please give them those building blocks of stories because of what we want to talk about today, a little bit about the moral imagination. So, can you tell us a little bit about what the moral imagination is?
Well, the moral imagination is a function of memory. Um, we digest experience, and oftentimes it gets cast in the form of metaphor. We might not do that consciously. You could use allegory as a word also, but I think it's metaphor in particular. And the process of the moral imagination is not entirely self-conscious. We have experiences, and up from our memory come uh, these thoughts and images and metaphors by which we interpret that experience, which was gained in the past through other experience. And oftentimes we make an evaluation of our present experience, um, which we would call ethical or moral evaluation. We're trying to make decisions about our lives and the lives of others that entail morality, right and wrong, good and evil, and so forth. I think this happens with all of us, but the moral imagination can be um, energetic and rich, or it can be poor. And that often depends upon not just our experience, but our education in our early years.
Yeah, I think that we see that on full display in our times here in the mid 2020s compared to in the mid to late 20th century when the moral imagination seemed so much more sure of itself and consistent across the board. But with the dumbing down of language and the poor, the it just,
It's a reduction of experience.
yes,
We're
thank you.
wrestling with how much our children are viewing the screen rather than being outdoors or being attentive to what goes on among people, even within their own family. So there's a deprivation there of experience,
Yeah.
and that weakens the resources, deprives the resources that we have in later life in order to steer a moral path.
Mm,
One of the things that really bothers me about if you go, like I have grandchildren now, so I go to the bookstore to buy books for them, or somebody else, I see the books other people are buying for them, and they're all didactic. They all have they all have an agenda, so to speak, whether they're a Christian book on the virtues, or they're ecological book about our nature and that sort of thing, whether it's right wing, left wing, Christian, non-Christian. Everybody has an agenda. They can't even do the like animal names or sounds without bringing in some kind of didactic lesson for the child. And I feel like we are fatiguing our children morally because we don't have stories. And I think it's going to wear them out and cause them to be morally confused in the end. Do you think stories help with this problem?
Yeah, they help immensely if they're good stories. What you're describing is bad stories,
Yes.
badly told. That second quotation that I gave you from Flannery O'Connor pretty much addresses that. Uh, the story is its own meaning. You
right.
don't abstract from a story uh, meaning. Uh, it should speak to you directly, and it's a function of imagination more than intellect. And uh, I it's lazy to introduce the kinds of stories that you're mentioning uh, to anyone. It's lazy to write such stories. They're uh, they're inferior by virtue of the fact that the author begins with an abstraction and writes a story in
Mm.
order to illustrate the abstraction. And that's not how good stories speak to us. Good story writers don't start with an abstraction. They start with concrete experience, with which we can associate ourselves
Mm.
and work out in story form solutions to our lives. And these people do not know what a story is, nor how to trust in a story. And
Amen.
it's everywhere. Yeah.
Well,
If it's not merely didactic, it's probably formalistic. It's
mm,
probably uh, you know a story retold many, many times and lost in the process. Um, we got a problem there. For the people who are writing these stories for children, I doubt that in many cases they have much how much they've read stories themselves sometimes. Um, it's baffling. There's certainly a lack of imagination, and imagination gets suffocated by adult rationalization or reason.
Uh,
Adult goals introduced to children, um, as if we know better how what we know better what it is that a child is interested in. And children have a natural narrative sense. We drive it out of them by and large, and through our educational system.
Oh, so sad, but so very true.
I wonder who the writers in the future will be. Probably those who escape the educational system,
yeah.
maybe uneducated, in quotation marks.
Well, we actually we may I mean they may be robots. They're almost robots anyway, so they might as well be robots in the future
But
because stories are terrible. Uh,
anyway,
well,
nobody's fine.
okay, let's move on to this whole idea of imaginative stories and their place in the lives of children. How does, people are writing these stories because they want people to be good, they want them to have their values. But how do values work in the hearts of a child through the imagination? Like they really don't work without the imagination, do they? They can't. But how does virtue work in stories?
Hmm. That's not uh, virtue is embodied in characters and within the plot itself. Um, if you if your aim is to write a story about about a particular virtue or using that particular virtue, you're going to fail because uh, story begins with the concrete and stays with the concrete. And children are most attracted to the concrete. They're not, particularly the younger ones, are not exercised in abstraction and reduction uh, to a particular principle, value, or virtue. Um, they, they experience the virtue in character and narrative. And that experience is, like I said, um, it may be retained in memory and brought back uh, when that individual encounters circumstances which uh, require uh, a particular virtue, whether it's courage or fairness or whatever it may be. Um, and and we don't ordinarily in life come with a list of virtues and pick from them whenever we think that they're needed. That's not how moral behavior actually occurs. It doesn't occur that way. It occurs through what I call a moral imagination, which draws up analogies to what we are experiencing in the present in order to make sense of that present.
I was just going to
And
let you ask a question, Dawn, because I've been
oh,
hogging it all up.
no, no. Okay, then. So, piggybacking on that question, then, in terms of the important stories, why are reading fairy tales in particular so important in the life of a child?
Well, because fairy tales are amongst the most concrete of stories. Um, they don't elaborate. Uh, they simply present places and persons and circumstances uh, in a way that uh, is least uh, affected by or shaped by abstraction. Um, Children love stories, fairy tales in particular, because they are concrete. Children are not in the habit of abstracting virtues or principles or rules out of stories. And the great fairy tales do not require us to do that, even though, some fairy tales have a moral after them, okay? The greater fairy tales generally do not, whether it's the Grimms or whether it's Hans Christian Andersen. They don't have morals. Sometimes, and I think it spoils it generally when they choose to put a moral at the end, because no moral is going to capture the entirety of the meaning of the narrative that you've just been through. So I just think the Grimms thought that fairy tales were the remnants of ancient poetry. That's one way of speaking of it. So if they were the remnants of ancient poetry, they spoke through it, through the concrete, and had the power to evoke feeling and then meaning and then purpose in that order.
Wow. That is so amazing. So one of the things we see a lot in the homeschooling movement and in certain circles is this idea that we don't want to read fairy tales to our children because they're evil, there's bad things, there's evil, we're worried that there'll be a bad influence on our child or they'll scare our child. What would you say to parents who who are afraid to read fairy tales to their children?
Children aren't afraid, and if the children need to be frightened on occasion. Actually, they 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 respond to fairy tale, which what we would call violence. Uh, uh, it allows them to be frightened. It enables them to be scared without the kinds of risks that take place in everyday life, where children are frightened. I remember being lost in New York uh, when the circus was in town. I remember that in particular. We went from Stanford drove, I guess it was, from Stanford to New York, Madison Square Gardens, and it was the Ringling Brothers Circus, and I got lost in a crowd. That's scary. That's not the kind of being frightened that a child needs. But children do need to be frightened. How to remove at best, in the best sense, and that's what stories enable children to do, to be frightened, and uh, well, I think it was Chesterton who said that uh, you needn't be worried about fairy tales because children know bogey anyhow, or the boogeyman. It's inside of them. And I think that's actually true. It is inside of us. And what the fairy tales offer us uh, is a Saint George who slays the dragon. So fairy tales do not leave us with the violence. They leave us with an answer to it. Even when a Grimm story ends where someone is blinded or something, um, that blinding has to be understood in the context of the whole story. And children probably remember the context better than the adults that are reading the story to them.
Mm.
And they will go back and they will figure it out. And that's what we're supposed to do as grown-ups, not
And,
just children.
and this ties into what you were talking about with respect to the moral imagination. So back to your story of being lost in New York City at the circus. had you perhaps not been told all of those wonderful fairy stories, if I'm not mistaken, by your grandmother, right? Perhaps you would not have had the moral imagination to keep your cool and know what to do and understand
Oh,
that
that
this
I
is going to
kept my
come to an
cool,
end.
though. I don't know that I kept my cool. What I'm saying is that there are encounters in life, even among small children, that are far more scary and potentially damaging, actually, to children than the stories we're talking about. These are, to begin with, at a remove, and children sense that. They know that. They don't articulate it as such, but they know that. But what Chesterton was saying is that fairy tales, in and of themselves, do not simply uh, in they are not simply uh, removed from violence. The violence in the Grimms is not gratuitous. Um, the meaning of blood as life, for example, or redeeming, comes through in the Grimm stories. It doesn't necessarily, and more often does not come through in the modern stories that children are introduced to through various media. I've never understood this. Beginning with the evening news.
Yes, excellent point. Well, I
That's
always,
all you do is have people. That's all the evening news is about, particularly in a particular locality, neighborhood, or city, right?
right,
Most of the evening news is about people getting killed, robbed, and it goes on and on.
right. I've heard Cindy say before, with respect to this question of whether fairy tales are appropriate for children because of they might contain scary elements that could frighten them. How better to confront something that is scary or violent for the first time than sitting next to someone who loves you and that you can walk through it with understanding that it is not real. And I've always appreciated. I don't articulate it as well as she did, but I've always appreciated that perspective.
Well, I think what happens is moms, we live in our own fairy tale world where there aren't any bad things. And we want to save our children in that way. And I don't think that makes them feel safe or warm. They know, like you said, there are monsters out there. They know the boogeyman. So when we read them a story like Bluebeard or one of the more, gruesome stories, I feel like, especially with my boys, it was like it helped them to trust me a little bit. Like, yeah, I was not going to hold on to their ankles and make them live in my fairy tale the rest of their lives, but I was going to acknowledge that there were things in the world that they needed to be ready to meet. And fairy tales is a really they're a wonderful way to do that.
Yes, I agree. Why I spend so much time with them.
Yeah. And
And
you're actually spending time with them now. So do you want to tell us a little bit about what you're working on right now?
I can. I'm working with Memoria Press uh, to produce a series of picture book versions of the Grimm's and Anderson fairy tales, um, with a fresh translation that I'm working with, uh, in order to uh, render uh, these stories in a musical way as I can, in a way which strikes the ear as rhythmic. Um, Most of the translators of these stories, serious translators, I don't think they have that particularly in mind, that the stories are going to be read out loud. They're serious about the language and rendering it as as literally, shall we say, as they can. Um, I've got in mind translation which has rhythm to it, has poetic speech uh, in it, and that's difficult to do, but it's rewarding. And I think it, in the end, most of the picture book versions of the great fairy tales are either retellings or they are uh, seriously shortened, probably for reasons having to do with even profit, if nothing else. So we need to have picture book versions of these stories that are complete and faithful to the text, while also um, uh, uh, appealing to the ear. And that's what we're working on.
So we're not going to expect from you the 5-minute fairy tale.
No,
I've seen that collection. Isn't that a real thing? It's
yes,
terrible.
well, yeah. Um, we're going to present the stories in their complete form. Um, there's not going to be bowdlerized or condensed in any way, nor retold. Oftentimes, the retellings not only leave out important moments in these stories, but introduce other events in the stories that are not true to the original. So it's very disappointing to go out in the market and look for these. Uh, it's surprising how few of the fairy tales appear in their original form and length in picture book versions.
Which is why I was so excited to hear from you recently at a retreat I attended in Northern Virginia that you were working on this project. And I can assure you that probably everyone listening to this podcast will be thrilled when your version of these tales uh, come out because for the very fact that you mentioned that it is impossible to find, nigh impossible to find great versions. Well,
I tried finding them for people who asked me where they could find picture book versions of these stories that were worthy of reading to their children, and there are not that many.
No.
No.
Sometimes the
Oh,
pictures are like better than the actual retelling in the book. Like they'll have gorgeous pictures, but not very good words.
exactly. A good example of this, and I discussed this in the second edition, is the ugly duckling. I cannot find anything in a picture book version that even approximates the length of the ugly duckling in the original by Anderson, or reflects. It doesn't eliminate some of the most significant moments in the story or scenes in the story. So we're hopelessly ignorant of what the ugly duckling is in its original form.
Mm.
and therefore unable to learn and glean from it what Anderson
Had
had in
in
mind.
Well, I point that out, don't I? I mean, what the ugly duckling has been reduced to in our day is a story about bullying.
Mhm.
The ugly duckling does get bullied, but the ugly duckling is not a victim, and the ugly duckling is of a mind and imagination of its own. And I argue in my book, the ugly duckling is about how beauty can transform us into beauty.
Mm.
Um, it's not exactly magic that the ugly duckling becomes a swan, but it's presented to us in such a way that it is kind of magic. Um, and the shock that he experiences when he sees himself in the water. Why so? Because the ugly duckling was an admirer of beauty from the very beginning, loved beauty so much that he became beautiful. That's really at the heart of Anderson's story, but actually at the heart of Anderson's own romanticism,
Mm.
serious romanticism.
And it's this very aspect of the story which is no longer available to people to read unless they have the original that prevents them from understanding that that it's really from being pointed to the transcendent through
Exactly.
this.
Yes,
Yeah,
that's what he had in mind.
yeah.
Um, and I think that story is about as Baudelairized and reduced as any fairy tale that we're that we are aware of that is uppermost in our minds as a fairy tale.
Hmm.
Ugly Duckling.
Now, you have used that term Baudelairize a couple of times. Can you explain it for our audience, for those people not familiar with it?
Well, it's basically a reduction of the text, cutting out of things, uh, and it can entail uh, a mind of the translator or presenter of the story, uh, uh, the mind of that person in ideological terms. So you reduce the story, not only reduce the story, but you reduce it to fit a preconceived notion of what the story should or is about.
Hmm. Right.
And
That's what
isn't that what so much of what we see just in culture more broadly is a reduction, not only in language, but in meaning entirely? And it's we can see what it's doing to us, can't we? Especially in the field of education. But we could talk about that forever. So let me shift a little bit and ask you if you is it possible for you to name your own favorite fairy tale?
oh heavens. Uh, next,
Like,
next,
tell me your favorite child, right?
I would prefer to answer that by saying what would I have preferred when I was a child?
Oh.
So, because what I prefer as an adult may not be what children prefer. I have that much humility about me that I'm not going to make that assumption. But I've always thought that Pinocchio is a great fairy tale, but adults don't get that much pleasure out of it by and large because it's so repetitive, and it's episodic and all the rest of it. But it works brilliantly with children because their lives, I think, they're struggling to make their to make their lives not episodic, to find some rhythm or purpose to their own lives as children, and that's what Pinocchio is about. And they children like repetition, whereas we as adults tend not to like it. They like to see the same mistake being made several times, and then seeing how the character who makes that mistake gets out of a jam. And Pinocchio does that, and that is entertaining for a child. I don't know that it's entertaining for adults.
I'm so glad you said that because recently, and this almost made me just sit at my computer and weep. I on a forum, a mom said, every book list I see that says these are good books has Pinocchio and Alice in Wonderland. She said, I don't like these books. I don't know how in the world did they ever make these lists that people are putting out. And some moms did say, I didn't like Pinocchio at first, but it kind of grew on me as time went on. But there's some reason why these stories stand the test of time. And while we may not get it, they may be hard for us. And I tell moms this all the time. Just because you're struggling with the book and the words are hard doesn't mean your child is struggling with that story because child is used to not understanding every word that he hears. So he's okay with that. Whereas you are freaking out that you need to look up this word and that word when you really don't. And, you just let the story wash over you. But when you said that about Pinocchio, I hope wherever that mom is that she she sees that there is something in these stories that these fairy tale elements that are very, very important to children. I don't, some of the folk songs the kids like the best, I just hate singing them. And they're usually the ones like Froggy Went a Courting, and it just goes on and on with the same thing. But the kids end up really, really liking those songs. So that was a great point you made.
Yeah, yeah, shorter stories. Um, Among the Grimms, I guess the first two that I've already translated might be the most beautiful in a way, Cinderella and Snow White, even in the German, especially in the German. Um, and Hans Christian Andersen, I think my favorite story of Hans Christian Andersen has to be The Nightingale, which is not that well known among our contemporary English-speaking people.
Huh. I'm not familiar with it actually, so now I'm very intrigued and I'm going to have to read it.
Yeah, it's in the second volume. I mean, the it's a second edition.
Oh, that's right.
I paired it with I guess it was the did I pair it with the what did I pair it with? The Ugly Duckling? I'm forgetting now.
Uh, it,
I did two stories in that,
I know you talk about the Snow Queen and you talk about the Steadfast Tin Soldier too. So, um,
but I do I think the Nightingale is quite beautiful. It, it's not surprising, therefore, that the Nightingale has been cast in the form of musical composition, ballet, and so forth.
Now, I have seen an edition, I think, by Gennady Spirin that
Mhm.
is The Nightingale. I'll have to look that up. Are you familiar with that illustrator?
No,
Oh, I'll have to send there's some they're
there, there,
beautifully illustrated.
there is a Nightingale picture book that is virtually complete. The story is that is no longer in print that I have, but you're asking me which fairy tales I like the most, and among Anderson's, I think I'd have to say The Nightingale. Yeah.
Again, motivation for me to go look that up. So thank you. Cindy, did you have something else that you wanted to ask?
no, I really love that we're talking about this and that your thoughts on these after so many years. But I did want to ask you a question because we're sitting here. Our audience can't see, but you have a library behind you. You've been a professor. You've seen the education system go through so many different. Now here we are at this homeschooling moment in a way. But I'm just curious about your own education and what you feel like looking back over your education in your life were the seminal things that mattered the most.
Yeah. Oh, I uh, the education I got in Stanford, Glenbrook, and Stanford, Connecticut, back in the 50s and 60s, um, was largely a pleasure for me. I don't. I, schools today are very different, I think, than what I experienced. Even environment. It's not just what happens in the classroom. So the first school I attended, well, from first grade through fourth grade, was Glenbrook School, which was built in the 19th century and was still heated by coal. And Mr. Mays down there, an old black man, was shoveling that coal, and he'd let us take the shovel in our hands and shovel some more coal into the furnace. There were no bells except the bell up on top of the bell tower. Um, we didn't have a cafeteria. We ate in the library, which was just another classroom. And I would say that Glenbrook School was a foundation for me, but not so much in the form of the curriculum, but the total experience of it. And maybe we also we prayed too. I I was I was in church the other day, and we gathered together. You know that song for Thanksgiving? It's a hymn, right?
Yeah.
We sing that hymn every Thanksgiving in public school, right? When I first started school, we said the Lord's Prayer every morning. Um, those were parts of the experience also. Uh, it was a small school. There weren't that many of us in it. I think that was probably good for me because I've never been good with big with crowds, comfortable in crowds anyway. Um, And it's interesting because I took account of how many class presidents in Stanford High School came out of Glenbrook School, one after another, year after year. Now, how did that happen?
Hmm.
Something must have gone on there. The teachers were good. My second and third grade teachers became principals. Yes. My second grade teacher would not stop praying, even when the Supreme Court said we should not pray. Um, but it was all rather normal. There was no controversy as such. We just, I don't know. Maybe we were left to our own devices more than in the schools today, certainly. So school extended beyond the school. So after school was over, we'd go and we'd play baseball in a sand lot or in a green pasture somewhere. Okay. So uh, the struggles over curriculum are almost secondary to the total experience of schooling itself, I think. I mean, not that I haven't fought for a return to classical learning and so I mean, that's vital. Um, uh, but there's more to it than that. I, I just, my high school was a very good high school. I mean, we still had there was Russian, there was Latin, there was Spanish, there was French, there was German. Okay, that's just languages. Greek had fallen out, but you still had Latin and you had Russian, right? Um, so I had a very good education from the standpoint of academic values, I suppose. Um, what can I say? It prepared me. Um, there's one teacher that I mentioned in my book, um, Helen Rivers, who I credit with having taught me the English language in the right way. But it was the first. She was my homeroom teacher for 3 years. She was my English teacher for 2 years. She was an utter disciplinarian and utterly frightening when she wanted to be. And for the first 3 weeks of seventh grade, we started middle school or what we call junior high school in seventh grade. I came home crying. I could not. I mean, she was terrifying. But as I say in that story, also, when graduation came came in ninth grade, and we were in that gymnasium, she came up to me, grabbed my head with her two hands, pulled my head to her lips, and kissed me. Said, "I'm proud of you."
Oh, I love it.
Oh,
I love it.
A teacher would not dare to do such a thing today, right?
No, no, not touch with two hands, much less kiss.
No,
I
much
think
less
the
kiss.
resilience of what she saw in you too, like that was hard, but you had to stick with it, and it made you a better person in the end.
Oh, but she taught me the English language, the grammar. She was a grammarian of the first class, but it was terrifying.
So it makes sense that she was a disciplinarian as well as a grammarian.
But she was, but she loved us.
Mm.
That's the thing about it. Yeah.
My son had a similar experience to that, if I may. He was attending a camp that we have locally, that a local Catholic church hosts a history camp every summer, and it has a different theme. One year it's French and Indian War, the next it is Revolutionary War, the next it is Civil War, and they cycle through these. But the kids are in character. They come in uniform, they are disciplined as if they were soldiers, and they learn so much. And if they act up, or even if they don't act up, just for the fun of it, they get told to do so many push ups or so many jumping jacks as their punishment, right? And my son would come home and he'd complain about the captain, Captain Rice. Ella, if you're listening, he would complain about Captain Rice. At the end of that week, when I asked him what his favorite part was and who his favorite person was, it was Captain Rice. Despite all of these disciplinary elements, perhaps because he invested in Gabriel, cared enough about Gabriel to discipline him,
Cared enough
really
about
resonated with him.
children know when they encounter someone who cares about them. Now, I knew that Helen Rivers cared about me, and she proved it in many ways over those 3 years. When I got a grade that was not reflected in the middle report, I remember one instance she went and she dressed down the math teacher. When does that happen today? Not that I
Wow.
knew about it. I only know about it because my mother told me, because Helen Rivers told her that this cannot happen, and I went and I protected him.
Wow.
Now, I you asked me. I don't know that that speaks exactly to my interest in theology or literature, but it disciplined me and formed me in ways that I was able to succeed in those areas of life, I think. Yeah.
And when you put that together with what you said about the music of language, you just have this beautiful, complete picture of the way, what I like to say, the way words work, the way meaning is made. So that's
Yeah.
awesome.
True. Yeah.
Well, before we let you go, can you tell us what you're currently reading just for fun?
Hmm. What am I currently reading? I'm I'm uh I'm reading a book on beauty.
Oh,
Let's see, by Donald McInerney. Who published this? Word on Fire.
oh,
It looks huge.
Yeah. Um, yeah, Bishop Barron, right? South.
oh.
That you know that.
Yes, yes.
In
Who
fact,
doesn't know that podcast lately?
yeah. And, 2 weeks from now, I'll be doing something like this with the young woman who heads up the publishing end of Word on Fire for children, because they just
Oh,
put together a collection of the Grimm's fairy tales. So we'll talk about the Grimm's fairy tales. That and yeah, that and a book about G.K. Chesterton. Actually, it's hard to describe. It's an alternate biography. It's called, which the person puts together citations from Chesterton that cover his life,
Ah.
which is really interesting because you see a lot of Chesterton that you don't come across ordinarily in
I'm interested in that. I haven't heard about that. Is that a newer book that has been put
yes.
out? It is. And it's called An Alternate Bernard?
When we're done, I'll
Okay, all right.
Yeah, we'll put it in the show notes. If he emails Dawn, we'll put that in the show notes because we're all running over to Word on Fire, and now we need to know this book title and name. So
yeah.
thank you so much for being here. This has been very, very delightful for us.
Yes, we appreciate it so much. Thank you for joining us.
Can I read the other quotation?
Oh, I was going to do that at the end. I would love if you do it instead. Yes, this
Okay.
is the time for it.
This is from Flannery O'Connor in her collection of essays entitled Mystery and Manners. Some people have the notion that you read the story and then climb out of it into the meaning. But for the fiction writer himself, the whole story is the meaning because it is an experience, not an abstraction.